Welcome to episode 4 of Dream Big Radio. And this is a good one. Today I'm speaking with fellow Imperial College alumni Paul Baranowski, who has taken the very unorthodox route of building a SaaS company for agribusinesses and smallholder farmers. The conversation goes down a few very interesting routes, from the entrepreneurial instincts of smallholder farmers to tourism tips for Kenya. So please enjoy. Okay. The numbers are going up, so I assume that we are going. Okay, welcome to what I have called Dream Big Radio, where I interview entrepreneurs in emerging markets who have big dreams and are trying to build the future for many places that people have preconceptions where they just don't see much happening. And you are a great example of that. So thank you, Paul.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
No. And just to start off, why don't you give us an idea of the problem that your company is working on?
Perfect. Yeah. So we work in emerging market agriculture, which is an enormous industry. So it's over $1 trillion worth of goods being bought and sold. 98% of all of the world's farms are smallholder farmers. Now, these farmers need services just like any other farmer. So they need to be able to purchase inputs like fertilizer, like seed. They need agronomy, finance, insurance, and all the rest of it. And then they need to be able to actually sell that produce on to exporters, to off-takers as well. The problem is that these farmers, and there's 500 million of them, don't have access to the internet or to smartphones. And this means that the only way that businesses can currently interact with farmers is via huge teams of field agents, essentially just paying for people to go to the farm in person to actually deliver the fertilizer or provide the agronomy. Now, that's enormously expensive. So the businesses are really struggling with profitability and scalability, but it also leaves a huge number of farmers without access to these key services. So something like 98% of farmers have never had a soil test, which we would think of as a hugely important part of how you actually grow a sustainable agronomic business. So it's what we're really looking to solve, is to connect those businesses to the farmers in a way that is affordable for both parties, but also scalable.
Okay, that's a big challenge to take on. Let's just walk through how you arrived at your company, Climate Edge now. So when did you start first working on this problem?
Yeah, so my background is in biology. I studied at Imperial College London, and then I went on to do a master's in something called environmental technology, which is basically how you apply science to create real world value. Now, as a part of that master's, you basically do a thesis where you go out into the real world, and the point is actually to prove that you can create value for people in practice and actually generate some value in the real world at scale. And we partnered with an organization called Neumann Coffee, who's one of the biggest coffee roasters in the world. And they were struggling to deliver agronomic advice at scale to their smallholder farmers. Initially, it was very much just sort of a research project. So we were just trying to understand what the problems were, what the challenges were, both for these organizations, but also for the farmers themselves. At the end of that thesis, we spent about 6 weeks in Honduras, really exploring the problem, really understanding it from both perspectives. My co-founder and myself didn't want to finish. Essentially, when we got to the end of university, we wanted to carry on. We thought there's a huge amount of value, and we could see that. Yeah. But also, it's such a fascinating industry to work in. The impacts you can create is enormous. You can really genuinely. You're not talking about eking out an extra 2% of yield, for example. You're really transforming someone's agricultural business. You can double the yield, and what they can do with that money is really inspiring and exciting for us. And it's just such a prevalent problem. We've worked all across the world. And so I think that sort of scalable opportunity was too tempting for us to let go. So when we finished the master's, we basically set up the company, worked in both European agriculture and tropical agriculture, which I think gave us a really interesting perspective to the same foundations, but like how different tools have been deployed in these different markets, and what you're trying to achieve is very slightly nuanced and different. And really just grew and scaled up from there. So went from, working with a couple farmers and doing consultancy through to now where we're at with over 500,000 farmers and 2,000 organizations on the platform. And it's very much just growing that underlying vision, which is, all right, how do we connect businesses to farmers in a way that works for both parties?
Okay. So you and your co-founder have been together from the start then?
Yes, too many years now. So 2015 we started the company, and then we were at uni together, so another 4 years before that as well.
Damn. That's it's great to see. Did you guys bond over this issue, or were you friends before?
We've always been really good friends, and we always have a good time together, but have a really good working relationship as well. I mean, they often talk about starting a business as being like a marriage, and so you do need to obviously make sure you're getting on with the other person. Yeah, no, I think we've got that healthy balance where we still have a lot of fun and it is an enjoyable process, but we also really care about the vision and mission that we're trying to achieve, and happy to buckle down to get that done as well.
Okay. And you've brought on a bigger team. What has bringing on other people been like? How have you chosen them?
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? Because you go from you doing absolutely everything through to understanding how you actually communicate the vision and the mission to other people and how you actually delegate. Now, I think the joy of it is when you bring someone on that's much better than you at what you do, which is like basically, an early stage, every person you bring on. Then you bring on your first developer and you're like, oh, thank God we can actually build a product. So I've really enjoyed that process. It comes with its own challenges, and I think you need to learn how to do it in a good way. It's not kind of an inherent skill set that you pick up necessarily at university, but it's been a really enjoyable process. In terms of how you choose people, I think really fundamentally you're looking for two things. You're looking for alignment around the actual vision and mission of what you're trying to achieve. It's so important that someone else is equally passionate about what you're trying to solve and the solution that you're building. And then obviously you're looking for expertise in that key area. And like I said, you want someone that can do something better than you. You're not looking just to bring people on to grow the team just in terms of numbers. You're looking to grow it in terms of expertise and scope of ideas and thought processes that are coming on as well. Very cool.
And you keep bringing up this vision and mission. Do you have like a shorthand, that a few lines where you, like a elevator pitch that you put across to people for Climate Edge?
Yeah, so for the vision and mission for us, it's making sure that every business and every farmer has access to the insights and the services they need to succeed. There are those two parties in it because we believe that businesses play a very unique role in creating that value for farmers, and that's really where we lie, is that intersection between the two. Okay,
cool. Before we get into the actual insights that you want to bring to farmers, can you talk us through the iterations of products that you've gone through over the years? I imagine you didn't start off with the final thing that you have now.
No, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so where did you start off?
So as I said, I mean, initially this was super research based. I think it was just us trying to learn what was going on. And there was no product, there was no service. We weren't coming into this trying to build a business. We were trying to understand what the problem was and think of solutions from, to be honest, a much more academic sense. The first sort of product that we actually brought to market was hardware. So it was actually the ability to collect data from farms, essentially sort of a cheap and affordable weather station that can be easily set up on a farm. The reason we went down that route was because the ultimate goal, as I said, is to connect these farmers to the services they need to succeed. And a big barrier in these markets, and agriculture generally, is access to data. If you don't know what's going on at the farm level, it's very hard to do anything specific for that farmer. It's hard to give a recommendation as to what agronomy they should be doing if you've got no idea where they're located or what soil type or what the crop type is, or pest pressures. And I'm sure you've seen in recent months, people like Alphabet or Google come out with Mineral, and it's all about that data play, precisely for that reason. Ultimately, that product didn't work out for us. We ended up dropping that after a number of years. And there's a few reasons for that. We found that even when you provided the data to companies, they struggled to then, they could use that to generate an insight, but they really struggled to then communicate that insight back to farmers because they were doing it all via these in-person field agents. So let's say that you now had the location of a farm and you could actually deliver a weather forecast. How do you deliver a weather forecast to 50,000 people via a field agent? It just doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? You need real-time communication. So what sort of happened is we were building this hardware product, and then we had to build the software product alongside it, which is essentially this communication platform that allows you to actually deliver insights and services to farmers at scale. And just increasingly we realized that actually that was where 99% of the value lied. So yes, data is a problem, but communication is always a problem. And so we sort of shifted over to the software side, ended up dropping the hardware, and then really doubled down on building this. Essentially, you think of it as a sort of CRM or customer relationship manager, but built specifically for agribusinesses. Okay. And that really developed and became our core product offering, and that's really the foundation of the business today.
Okay. When people think of CRM, a lot of people will think of things like Salesforce or Hootsuite. Is there similarities between them? Like, if someone from the UK or Europe looked at it, would they be able to understand it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the core point of a customer relationship manager is building that connection between a business and the end customer. What you're fundamentally trying to do, if let's say you're doing marketing, is identify a group of people that have a problem that you can solve, right? If you boil down marketing, that's all it is. Sales is then, okay, cool. How do I then get the solution to these people and have a transaction that enables us to deliver that solution? Operations is then like, okay, how do I actually scale up the solution for them and be delivering the value that I promised? Those business problems exist across every market for every business, right? What we're doing is exactly that same concept that Salesforce or HubSpot does in the UK, but applying it to a market where the fundamentals look slightly different. So, for example, in the UK, most consumers will have a bank account and will have a debit or a credit card. When you're talking about smallholder farmers in emerging markets, so like in Kenya where we're based, most people, 98% of people, will be using mobile money or M-Pesa. So it's very similar concepts to what Salesforce or HubSpot are doing, but you're saying, actually, let's transact with the customer using a technology that's actually accessible and scalable to them. Same in terms of the communication side. In the UK, everything is very digital, right? So you're used to being able to actually connect with a consumer via an app, for example. The farmers, again, that we work with don't have access to smartphones. If they do, internet costs are very prohibitive and very patchy in these regions. So we've just replaced that technology with SMS and voice, which is ultimately free to the farmers. They don't have any kind of cost barriers to uptake, but also is just so much more scalable and so much cheaper for the business to use as well. So you would see a platform that delivers the same value, but how we deliver it is very unique and very specific to this market.
Okay. And how have you seen the relationships between the smallholder farmers and the agribusinesses that you work with develop as a result of using Climate Edge?
Yeah, it's absolutely massive. There's a few examples that for me really kind of capture the heart of what we do and what drives me as a business owner. So one of them, we work with a cooperative, which is essentially a group of farmers that come together and then like basically co-purchase processing equipment and access to market and things like that. So it's basically just a group of, let's say, 50,000 farmers. During COVID, their cooperative was trying to distribute personal protective equipment to their member farmers in order to protect them from the disease. Before they were using our solution, the only way they could communicate with farmers was by putting posters up in a local church or by sending out field agents. What ended up happening is only around 10% of their membership, so let's say you got 50,000 people, only 5,000 people were actually coming and picking up the personal protective equipment. When they started using our platform, and they basic things, just had a list of all the phone numbers, sent out messages and said, this is the date, this is what we're offering, you just come along and you can pick up your equipment. It jumped to 90%. Wow. And it's just that enormous change. It's just about building that connection that enables the farmer to know, all right, cool, if I come along on this day, I know it's going to be open, I know what I'm going to get, and I see value in that. And that story is replicated across so many areas. You can see that in terms of farmers turning up and the factories that are going to purchase their crop are actually open. And what you end up seeing is that, yes, organizations can deliver their services in a more scalable and affordable way, but also just that engagement and connection between the business and the farmer is so much greater. And the farmer actually begins to associate that business with value. They actually appreciate what that business is offering. Whereas before, it was just so disconnected. The farmer might know the field agent, but be a bit fuzzy as to who's actually providing the service. And that for us is just a really positive development that we've seen when our technology is implemented, that just closeness, that engagement, that interaction that's happening directly between these two parties.
Okay. Are you seeing like a development of smallholder farmers' perception of their relationship with agribusinesses, not just being takers, but being makers? They have access to new information, potentially new buyers of the products that they create. They are developing themselves in an entrepreneurial sense. Is that something that you see as a consequence of your product?
No, and it's hugely important. I mean, just a simple example would be that the farmers actually demand more from the businesses, and the businesses like that, because if a farmer's coming back to you and actually asking for more, then that gives you an opportunity to build a business. So a basic example of that would be just customer support. So we've got kind of 2 solutions built in ready to go for the app, and it can get more complex, but it's most simple. A farmer can text in a question via SMS and it comes into your inbox as a business. Or they can phone up and it's almost like a visual voicemail answer machine that the farmer can use as well. By doing that, the farmer can ask questions like, I bought this product, which is a premium product. I splashed out a little bit, do you know what I mean? And I really want to make sure I apply it well, but I've never done it before. They can ask questions like that, and the business has the opportunity to directly respond and actually give them the information they need to make the most out of their product. Farmers super happy because they've actually made a bet on a slightly more premium product, but actually getting the tight customer support that was perhaps lacking before. But for the business, it's so incredibly helpful that they know what people are struggling with. And we've worked with companies that are producing fertilizer that have no idea what crops their product is being used on. And without that basic insight, like how can you do marketing? How can you improve the instructions on your product manual to make sure that farmers get the most out of it? If you don't have that information, it's so difficult to move the relationship on between a farmer and a customer, a organization and a farmer beyond just a transaction. But when you actually start building a connection and building a relationship, you can grow so much quicker, and the farmer can become your biggest advocate and start telling other farmers about how they use this product and it really changed and it was great customer support. And it just really changes that relationship from being very 2-dimensional to a very 3D relationship.
It's really interesting that you've brought that up. There's a lot of things that I've read on this area, and people talk about smallholder farmers. Eventually, it's going to become like the West, where the best farmers get all the land. But you're saying smallholder farmers, they're all benefiting when they use this product. So what are some... You talked about you worked in European agriculture as well. What were surprising differences that maybe you hadn't considered, like above, beyond just what most people perceive? What were some really interesting differences that you noticed?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I think the fundamentals are very similar. Mm-hmm. Like a farm is a farm and you need to purchase inputs and sell your crop. So the basis is there. I think there's a few things that people perhaps underestimate with smallholder agriculture. And when you actually really embed yourselves in there and spend time with the farmers and just chat to them and learn about it, smallholder farmers are insanely entrepreneurial.
Okay.
When you look at the resources they have access to and the ability to create value out of that, it's absolutely wild. So a couple examples of that, right? Insurance is a product that's vitally important because it just allows you to diversify your risk, and especially in agriculture when you're so at the mercy of external conditions and climate change and the rest of it, hugely important. A lot of smallholder farmers don't have access to insurance. It's something we want to change, and we want to be able to, the farmers that do want to be able to purchase it should be able to. But in absence of that, you see them doing things like diversifying their crops in really interesting ways. So they'll buy crops they'll plant crops, some that do very well under certain conditions and have a small portion of their land that will do well under different conditions, which just means that sort of hedging their bets a little bit about what's going to happen. Maybe they'll plant a small amount of, very high value crop, but then they'll still have a subsistence crop. So if everything goes wrong, at least they still have food to put on the table. And when you actually dig into the strategies that they implement, it's incredibly complex and it's really impressive. Other examples, I spoke to one farmer that went to a coconut factory and got all of the husks for free. So when you dehusk a coconut, obviously you've got the fibrous material. The coconut factory didn't know what to do with those things, and so he'd given it for free to this farmer, and then he lugged it back to his farm and he used that as a sort of cover crop. So basically just applied it on the ground, so when it's super hot, the water doesn't evaporate and it holds the water. And it's things like that some of these, it's not like he has access to the internet, it's like Googled and someone else has done it or the rest of it. It's very entrepreneurial individuals that have identified. I was in another place and they were using carpets. They were using old carpets. So when the carpet would come out of the house, they were like, oh, what should we do with it? And they're like, well, we should put it on the farm. And we measured the difference, and it was something like 20 degrees difference between the surface of the soil when there was no carpet and the bit underneath, which is literally life or death for some of the crops. I think that's something that people don't necessarily yet realize or think of. But when you spend time amongst them, they're very inspiring individuals.
I bet. That was one thing I came across in Rwanda. Is on a coffee plantation, they were using banana leaves on the ground to do the exact same thing that you were talking about. So how was the experience of embedding yourself with these communities, with people in far-off lands speak a different language? I imagine that you still do it every now and then. How have those experiences been?
Yeah, no, and it's super important. We do it a lot. This is, I guess, one of the other kind of things that I think people sometimes overlook is that any great company, pick Airbnb, is a good example, that has to do proper user research and really focus on the user experience. And that's true for ourselves working in emerging markets. Like the foundations of what we're doing is the same as any great business anywhere.
Yeah.
I obviously love spending time in these regions and being on the farm. I think you have a very unique opportunity when you are building a business in these spaces, because you can chat to a farmer one-on-one without, like, you get to put yourself into places that would be a lot harder to get into otherwise, if that makes sense. So you go to the farm, you have a really interesting chat where they'll be able to talk about all of their knowledge, and then they'll be like, oh cool, do you want to come have lunch? And you come to your house, and then they'll go to the pub after, or the local bar. Like, those are the things, that are very unique, and I really appreciate and really treasure. And ultimately, we just built a lot of good friendships, I think, over the time with various people all across the world, and it's a unique, special experience. But I think it is one that you can often get through that business relationship that can be hard purely just if you travel to a country.
I can imagine. Have you picked up any of the local languages?
One of the problems is there's so many local languages. So when we worked in Central America, it's a bit easier because it's Spanish. In places like Kenya, we work with the Kenya Wildlife Trust in the Masai Mara, and they obviously speak Masai. And then you work in Meru, and they speak Meru. And Swahili and English are kind of the more dominant languages in terms of like what's taken up nationally. But especially when you go to a local farmer level, often you'll find that the local language will be the one that they are most comfortable with. So I think the problem is I've not picked up beyond basic words in the 80 plus languages that you encounter. It's quite difficult to keep a track of. I am trying though.
I can imagine. So you talked about climate change and entrepreneurial aspects. Have you come across any really interesting ways that smallholder farmers are combating or just diminishing the impact of climate change? Because climate change is something that comes up a lot. It's in a lot of the negative coverage of the prospects for Africa. Climate change is just going to ruin their agricultural prospects. Have you come across any really just entrepreneurial different approaches to this?
So I think one of the other surprising things is just how educated and aware these smallholder farmers that we work with are on the concepts of climate change. And it makes sense, right? Because it obviously has, like you said, huge implications on them. But there's so many people that you'll talk to that will be talking about like carbon markets and all the rest of it, which is just like a novel concept generally in terms of like actually uptake. Yeah, but really interesting concepts there. So what you often see with the smallholder farmers that we work with is that they have a very good understanding of how the natural landscape around them affects agriculture. So often it's not just climate change at a national level that impacts the farmer, but also local changes like deforestation, for example, can have huge impacts. And so some of the things that you see are farmers grouping together and replanting areas of land to actually bring back natural rainfall and actually to hold the soil material back in the soil and the crap in the. Sorry.
Don't worry.
Rambling.
Ramble away.
We saying too high level for
So you're talking about like carbon credits and stuff like that. It's just it's hard to for me, I couldn't visualize a way that using carbon credits would impact farmers that have land of 1 hectare or 4 hectares. It just doesn't. It seems that's maybe for airlines or big corporations to deal
Yeah.
with. That's not going to tackle the on-the-ground issues.
Well, I think the interesting concept there is that smallholder farmers make up like 98% of the world's farms. And agriculture is sort of in this unique position where it's both a huge contributor to climate change. You look, it's a very carbon intensive business, especially things like fertilizer, but obviously also a huge portion of land use is agriculture and can actually sequester carbon in a very unique way that other industries can't. So it's almost in this kind of balancing point between being a negative contributor, but also a huge opportunity. And I think smallholder farmers generally are actually incredibly aware of that and willing in a way that I find incredibly admirable to want to sequester carbon, not even just because it benefits them, but just because they think it's the right thing to do and they see the importance of the climate. And I think, when you're in that very tangible business where the climate affects you every day, they see the importance of it. There's a lot of awareness of climate change in these regions. But I think it's very important that that's done in a sensible way that doesn't detriment the farmers' ability to build a sustainable business as well. As you said, these are very small farms and they can't take on all of the responsibility for sequestering carbon for the rest of the world. So it just has to be done in a balance, essentially.
Okay. And how are these farmers getting their information? You've mentioned a few times they're surprisingly educated, or maybe I shouldn't say surprisingly to a layperson like me who's not actually interacting with them. Are they listening to podcasts? Are they watching YouTube? How are they educating themselves?
Yeah, so I think there's a few pathways. Radio is a hugely important source of information with the end farmers that we work with. They often will be part of cooperatives, and that kind of peer-to-peer learning is really important. There's a company actually, unfortunately, recently shut down, but called WeFarm, that people might have heard of, that is basically a peer-to-peer kind of networking for smallholder farmers that really capitalised on that. That sort of social proof is hugely important to them. You obviously have a lot of NGOs and so on working in these regions that we're providing training, businesses as well that are providing agronomy to them. So there's a lot of different sources of information to them. And I think a lot of it also just comes, like I said, from their own entrepreneurial approach to it. Like there's a lot of, you see it all the time, like trial and error, figuring stuff out. And they suddenly find something that works, spreads like wildfire amongst their kind of peers that have seen that success and want to jump onto it. Yeah,
gossip theory.
Exactly.
You want to copy the success of your neighbor.
Exactly.
So you talked about WeFarm. Is this? I imagine it's quite a hard area for business to succeed in. Like your end consumer isn't necessarily cash wealthy, so they don't have much money to distribute. How have you found setting up a revenue generating business in this area?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, not just for us, but for any business that's trying to work within this sector and work within this market. And I think that's probably one of the biggest problems that you see is profitability and scalability. Now, it is an enormous industry. Like you can't get away from the sheer amount of value that's created there. Like I say, African agribusiness getting up to $1 trillion. So the problem is not necessarily the value of the market overall and the ability to generate revenue. A lot of people can do that. It's how do you do that in a cost-effective way where your actual unit economics work, i.e. that when you're trying to deliver a service to, like you said, one farmer that's got 1 hectare, that's obviously way more difficult than if you're trying to deliver a service to one farmer that owns 1,000 hectares. So I think the challenge is more that sort of scalability of interaction and communication, and that's the bit that we're focusing on. Now, ultimately, if we can solve that problem for ourselves at a business level, that scales to all of our customers as well. And so I think it's just, yes, there are challenges that are perhaps unique to this market, but every business faces unique challenges. I think the opportunity is there in abundance. It's just unlocking it, which is the key. Yeah.
And you must have found a way to do this. Are there other businesses in this area, whether they be based here in the UK or Kenya, that you are able to provide advice to as to how you can actually monetize this opportunity and grow the services and products that you're developing to these smallholder farmers?
So I think the key view that we've always had is that face-to-face is a hugely important part, and we would never advocate for that going away. Kind of analogy I'd say is that, you buy a product like Salesforce, you don't fire your sales team, right? Like you make them more efficient and you enable it to work at scale. And I think that's the core place that digital technology can play. So for me, that digital piece is hugely important, and we need to leverage these technologies that these farmers are using anyway. Like it's madness not to try and use something like M-Pesa that's got such broad uptake anyway, in order to reduce the transaction cost that you as a business face. Now, there are challenges to that, and that's kind of what our software actually solves. I think the second really important part for us is collaboration. It's absolutely vital that you don't end up with a situation with every single business going into this market trying to capture the entire pie and being like, we're going to do absolutely everything. I think I spoke to you before about this, but it's similar to Amazon jumping in and then trying to also build the postal service at the same time. Like, it doesn't make sense. And there is room for a lot of people in this market to be delivering specialist support and advice. And for me, the facilitation of those connections is really important. And that's the second kind of big part of our business, is how we enable everyone from someone providing agronomy to fertilizer to seed, how we enable them to come together and deliver one holistic service to a farmer rather than 5 piecemeal services delivered by 5 different field agents that are all inefficient and poor value for the farmer overall. So I think those are the 2 key things specifically for this market. You have to have a digital piece because it simply doesn't work elsewhere. But also you have to be looking beyond your own doors and working with other businesses and seeing how you can come together to create value rather than seeing everyone as a competitor and if somebody wins, you're losing, because I just don't think that's true.
That's interesting. It was something that I came across in Rwanda when I was talking to business people, entrepreneurs. They kept bringing up this concept that they don't have competition in Rwanda. Everyone's trying to work together to solve the bigger problem that faces Rwanda and Africa as a whole. So is that something that you've seen, like, working in this place? Or it sounded like a bit airy-fairy to me, traditional, like that you've been told competition is everything growing up here.
I've seen a mixture. I think it's a spectrum like you see anyway. You see some companies that are really open to collaboration and see that if they can deliver their value really succinctly in a very powerful way, that's all they need to do to build a sustainable business. And I think you see other people that try and like own all the data and own all the relationships and all the rest of it. I think a lot of that stuff will come out in the wash. I think the need for collaboration isn't an airy-fairy concept just because of it sounds nice. I think it fundamentally needs to happen in this market. One of the challenges of agriculture specifically is it's not a homogenous set of people growing a homogenous set of crops in a homogenous land. It's so many little micro networks, and often when you see is a lot of businesses actually struggle to scale between those micro networks. So you can look at like the agroecological zones that you see in Kenya. There's a lot of them. When you add on different languages and different crops on top of that, and different socioeconomic status of farmers that can purchase different products, it's very difficult to be like, I'm as one business going to solve all of these problems. Yeah. So I think it's, a true platform business generates an order of magnitude more value for people using its platform than it captures ever itself. And that's true of any platform business. It's a very viable, strong business model. And ultimately it's the one that we believe will succeed in this market. So, perhaps there's competition with other platform businesses, but I don't think when you're talking about the individual service providers that it makes a huge amount of sense to have them clashing at the doors when really the opportunity is wide open. It's only 6% captured. You've got 94% to try and grow into. Yeah. That's the challenge, not competing over the 6%.
Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good perspective, really. It's pretty good perspective. Back to M-Pesa. I was just wondering if you could give us an overview of what M-Pesa is and what it allows you to do. Because when I was in Africa, I saw that they have very different systems to do the same things that we do here. And that was one of the most interesting things. And M-Pesa is just so, it highlights that so well. So if you could just give us an overview of M-Pesa and how Climate Edge works with it.
Yeah, so mobile banking in places like Kenya is leaps and bounds ahead of what we've been doing in the UK, for example. M-Pesa's is a really cool concept. So try and like think back to when you maybe had your Nokia brick phone and you had to pay as you go, right? So you had to top up your credit, and you would do that, you know, maybe top up £10, and then you would draw down on it as you send messages or do voice calls. The innovation of M-Pesa is essentially like, well, if I've topped up my phone £10, what about if I could send that money to you, and then you've got £10 on your phone and I've got £0, and I've actually just made a transaction. No bank account has been involved in that process, right? And when you topped up your phone, I'm sure you didn't need to go on and go to Barclays and use a credit card. You could just go to a shop and give them £10. So essentially it was this sort of idea that, well, actually kind of the foundations and the fundamentals of a banking system, in inverted commas, are already happening without the middleman of the bank. So why don't we actually figure out how we can scale that up? And M-Pesa just means that you see it at such wildly different scales. You can like pay your water bill with it, but you can also go to the market and buy a fruit for 5p. Like it's an insane solution that's just so easy to use. The UX of it's super simple, super scalable, and works on any phone. Like you don't need to have a smartphone with an app, and you don't need to set up a bank account and all the rest of it. So M-Pesa is this really fantastic enabling technology. What you're sort of seeing in these regions like East Africa more broadly is then a wave of technology that's built off this that allows you to plug the concept of M-Pesa into APIs. So you can start to actually programmatically use that money. Someone like Paystack, who I think in Nigeria and Kenya, is a good example of that. So now I can actually send money to you via M-Pesa, but using a computer. Now, what we're saying is that on top of that, there is going to be a third wave, which is that actually you start to then plug that API into a business's operation. So I'm not just sending you money, but I can actually say I'm sending this specific individual money because they've bought, or I've bought in that case, 10 kilos of coffee crop. And you're actually slowly turning that enabling technology of just being able to transfer money into something which is very deeply integrated into the core value that you're creating as a business. Fundamentally, what you're doing is just making it so much cheaper to buy and sell from smallholder farmers in a very user-friendly way. But rather than having to, previously companies would go and either send a field agent to collect money in person, or they can accept M-Pesa mobile money at the moment, but you end up with just a list of phone numbers and M-Pesa references, and you don't know who the person is or what they've bought. We're just taking those concepts and integrating it super tightly, so you know who your customers are, you know what products they've bought, no money goes missing on the way because if it's not being put in a paper bag somewhere. It's very clear, and it's making it super easy for businesses to actually benefit from that technology rather than having to build out the entire infrastructure themselves.
God, it sounds like they're getting their own way to a cashless economy almost. Is that something you agree with?
Yeah. It's absolutely huge. And not in every market. Again, like you look at different countries and they implement things differently and there's different approaches to it. But I love it. Like when I go to these regions, I just set it up on my phone. It's just so much easier than like even Apple Pay or Android Pay or something. Yeah, it's just very, very simple. And accepted basically everywhere. So it's a really fantastic solution. To be honest, it's been very impressive, the growth, but also I guess not surprising when you look at how good it is.
Is it you just get it when you get a phone number or a SIM card?
Yes, you have to get a SIM card. And again, the interesting thing here is the SIM cards you have to have a national ID for, right? So you almost have a degree of identification that's happening as well in that. And then essentially there's a few different providers, M-Pesa, Safaricom, but there are other providers that offer similar-ish solutions. Yeah, you basically just set it up and get going. There's a lot of different ways that you can pay. You can do stuff like pay bill where you share a number, or you can share your actual phone number and the amount, but it's super simple.
Great. And so you're active in Kenya and Tanzania.
Yeah.
What differences jump out to you between these countries?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So we're mainly operating in Kenya because it is really at the forefront of this tech revolution. That's important for a couple of reasons. One, it gives us the raw technologies like M-Pesa that enable us to build real good solutions on top of it. But also Kenya's got fantastic talent available as well because you've got so many people that have gone through startups and built them. And you can actually amalgamate and bring them into the company and bring those unique insights. it's very hard, I guess, to summarize the differences between somewhere like Kenya or Tanzania or Ghana in the similar way that's hard to summarize the difference between England and Scotland and France, right? They are different, but the fundamentals are the same. It's people. I think that's the thing. It's people doing people things, and if you can deliver and create value for one person in Kenya, you can do the same in Tanzania, you can do the same in Ghana. You might just be doing it in a slightly different way based on a slightly different structure. But the fundamentals, to be honest, are broadly the same.
Okay. Yeah, that's it's kind of the answer I was expecting. Yeah, people are people. Everywhere I've traveled, people always ask me, like, what's your favorite place, blah, blah, blah. And it is kind of like, yes, places are beautiful, but people are just trying to do the same things or get the same results, but in different ways because they live in different places.
Yeah, exactly. That's the key, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's really, really interesting. In this area, are you seeing any really interesting innovations, other companies doing really cool things that you think are exciting?
Yeah, I think that's something that's very interesting is kind of following on from that last comment. The fundamentals and what you're trying to achieve, like most companies are trying to do broadly the same thing, right? You're working in agriculture. What do you want to achieve? Well, you want to grow more crop that's better quality, and you want your farm to be resilient. But there are wildly different approaches to how companies are going about trying to do that, and it's very interesting. And there's room for all of them, but it's very interesting to see the different kind of mindsets and ethos that go into that. So a couple of examples, like I said, We Farm went down the peer-to-peer route, super heavy. So they're actually kind of very analogous to us as a business, but it was all about building a network of engaged farmers and that ability to have the sort of social proof that, I've seen my neighbor do this and therefore I want to do it as well. But how can you leverage digital technology like SMS to do that across an entire country rather than just what's visible from my neighbor? So they went down the very peer-to-peer route, whereas we're going down very much and unlocking relationships between companies and farmers. Like the peer-to-peer side is there, but it's definitely not a strong focus of us. Other organizations like Apollo Agriculture, they are very much kind of shops on the ground, and they've vertically integrated. So rather than enabling each individual business to build a relationship with the farmer, it's all sort of brought into one single physical location that a farmer can go to in that one place where they can purchase fertilizer and get agronomy and get insurance and loans. So it's that vertical integration, whereas we're very much a horizontal play. I don't think anyone knows right now which strategy will work. And I'm sure it's like most of these things. I think some of them will work in certain places and not in other places for various reasons. And I find that very inspiring because, like I said, everyone's orientated around a broadly similar vision and mission, but I just love seeing the creativity in how companies and individuals go about solving the problems.
Yeah, I think that's one of the most exciting things about the entrepreneurial space around Africa right now, because there seems to be so much like clear opportunity, but obviously there's no dominant design. No one's figured out this is what works. There's very few like billion-dollar companies that you can just be like, okay, I'm going to slightly tweak that business model and I've got a decent chance of being okay.
Yeah, 100%. It's wide open.
Yeah, marching forward and seeing what happens. So how do you see the future of Climate Edge? Near term, mid-term, long term?
Yeah, very good question. I mean, long term, obviously, that just comes down to the vision and mission, right? Like my goal would be that every single farmer can access, as I said, the services and insights they need to succeed. There's 500 million of them. We've got 500,000 at the moment, and we don't have all the services they need. So incrementally, I'm working towards that long-term vision. I think beyond that, the other thing that we're really looking to build out over the next kind of 2 to 3 years is that ecosystem side. So we're starting off obviously helping individual businesses connect to a network of farmers, but I'm really excited about the opportunities that you unlock when you start allowing those businesses to work with each other as well. So you kind of see that progression, right? You've got a business interacting with a farmer, you've then got the businesses coming together to deliver a holistic solution, and then overall the geographical scale of making that available to every farmer is super exciting. So that's the broad playbook and the broad roadmap that we're working towards. There's obviously a lot of challenges, a lot of unknowns along the way, but it's something that's, for me personally, very inspiring and very exciting because you have that proximity of goals. We've got things over the next couple of months, but you also have this just huge opportunity over the next 10, 20, 30 years as well.
Yeah. And what's it like working on this from the UK? I would imagine if you're in Africa, you'd have a community of businesses that are trying to solve this. Do you still have that same community, or what is it like interacting from thousands of miles away with people that you employ or other people that are also stakeholders in this issue on the ground in Kenya?
I don't think you can build a great business and be thousands of miles away from your customers. I think you need to spend time with them, and we spend enormous amounts of time back and forth between the UK and between Nairobi, specifically in Kenya. Again, I think that's the core of any good business. I don't know if you've heard the story again about Airbnb at the start when they were talking about the problems they were facing, and obviously Airbnb was a very uncertain proposition, right? The idea that somebody would be willing to open up their house for a stranger to stay in.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest bits of advice they got when I think it was part of Y Combinator was like, why are you here? Like, where are your users? And I think they said it was in New York. I can't remember the exact location. It was like, so why are you here in California? Like, go to New York and spend time with them and understand it. Do proper user research and understand what the barriers are. So I think that is, again, hugely important for any business to spend time out there. We've got permanent staff in the UK, we've got permanent staff in Kenya. And for us, I think there's advantages, pros and cons to both locations. I mean, ultimately, we aspire to be a global business. So to be honest, this is going to be a problem that we face even if we were located in Nairobi. We still want to be delivering solutions in India, in Latin America, for example. So if you aspire to that sort of scale, I would rather that we start figuring that stuff out from day one rather than, even if we're located in Kenya, we're still going to struggle to scale beyond that location. Go jump to Nigeria. It's not close, right? You look when you see like most of the rest of the world fitting into Africa as a continent. You're like, it's a big old place. Ultimately, you just got to spend time with people and build up that community and invest in it and figure out how you make a distributed team function together with a shared mission.
Very cool. And you mentioned India and South America. Do you have any near-term or mid-term plans to expand there, or is that a bit further down the line?
Yeah, further down the line for us. So I've worked across all of these different locations and I know enough about them to know that it is the same fundamental problem that you're solving and the same fundamental solution can scale to them. However, that's very different in terms of when you look at the resources and operational constraints of trying to expand across all these regions as a small company. So, no, we're very set on Kenya specifically at the moment. We scale to a couple other countries. That we've done some stuff in Ghana and some stuff in Tanzania, largely to understand what the barriers would be to scale, to make sure that we've actually thought that through. And as we build the product, we're bearing in mind that we know we want to be that sort of global company in the future. But Kenya's got more than enough businesses and more than enough farmers to keep us busy for the moment. And we'll look to scale at the point where we think that we can create more value from that rather than facing just increasing operational issues as a result.
Fair. On a bit of a lighter note, do you have any tourist recommendations for anyone visiting Kenya?
It's a very cool place. I think one of the probably the most obvious one that you find when you look up Kenya is going to the Nairobi game park is just such a bizarre experience.
Really?
Because, you see all these like super cool animals and then you see skyscrapers and just the juxtaposition of that is like really,
in the park.
Yeah, because it's literally just outside Nairobi. So you can literally see zebras and like the headquarters of some multinational in the same eyesight. And that for me, like kind of, I guess it captures for me some of the excitement of what we do as well, like working with Smallholder Farmers, but in these huge opportunity areas. So that's super cool. Giraffe cafe, it's pretty cool. Get to feed some giraffes.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
They just come up to you whilst you're having a cup of coffee?
You have to go to like the third floor, but that's very cool. I mean, Kenya is obviously a gorgeous place. The Masai Mara, where we're working with Kenya Wildlife Trust, is just awesome. I'm very jealous because they obviously do Zoom calls and so on with them. And like you got in your window grey old London, and then they've got the Masai Mara behind them, and you're like, I feel like you've won this one. It's a very beautiful place. And I think often also try and get away from just Nairobi and just the main places. Like going up north, for example, is super interesting. I've got a soft spot for Uganda as well.
Okay.
Really beautiful place. And a lot of adventure sports as well. So if you're into kayaking or rafting, there's some good spots as well.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? You ever tempted just to move out there for a year or two?
I 100% am. I mean, I've got a son, which is why I'm somewhat tied to not skipping over there too often. But no, I mean, I spend a lot of time out there, to be honest. I do get my fill.
Okay, amazing. And we normally end this on me asking the question, are there any other companies that you think are really exciting and I would be interested in interviewing in this area?
Gosh, yeah, there's quite a lot. Someone that is really interesting. I went to a talk by them the other day. Is Kenny Ewan from WeFarm. So WeFarm unfortunately went bust a few months ago, but their story is fascinating. They had millions of users, 3 million users on this peer-to-peer SMS sharing network. I think he's got some really interesting insights into how you build a really big venture-backed. There's some real top-tier venture capitalist firms behind them. A venture-backed company in this space, and they were really one of the pioneers of it. So that would probably be. I've had some fantastic conversations with them, and that would be one of my recommendations. But to be honest, there are absolutely tons of them. Like Null and Money is a really interesting one, looking at remittances from the UK to East Africa and a few other locations. You've got companies like Paystack, who are that sort of second wave of fintech that's happening in Africa. Yeah. There's a lot going on. I don't think you'll be short of interviews.
That's brilliant. How has it been raising funding in this area been? Are VCs attracted to it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think it's got a enormous opportunity. I think some VCs are somewhat. You mentioned before, like the problems of creating a strong revenue generating business in this market is less clear. Like I think there's a lot of opportunity, but it still needs to be unlocked as to how that actually works. I think that puts off some VCs. But the African VC market as well is definitely growing, and you see it. It's actually, I think, out indexes in terms of the percentage of GDP that's spent on VC capital in Africa. So there is a lot of opportunity there as well. But I think every business faces unique challenges in fundraising. Like fundraising is never fun, right? Like it's always a bit of a drag. And if you're a B2C consumer company, you're going to be facing people worrying about competition. And if you're working in this market, it may be a slightly different problem. But it's I think you mentioned before, right? Just the tailwinds behind emerging markets generally. And emerging market agriculture specifically are enormous, and I think that opportunity is there to be had.
Yeah, fundraising is it has been an issue with other entrepreneurs I've talked with. There's actually a London-based startup company. I don't know if you've come across them, called Vula VC, where they are basically trying to reduce the amount of time African startups spend looking for fundraising by automating the pitch deck creation.
Right. Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So I don't think they're very old, maybe 2 or 3 years, but I think it's a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, 100%.
I won't keep you much longer. I know you've got stuff to go back to. So thank you so much for joining me today, Paul. This has been really, really interesting, and you've given me some good people to reach out to.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation.
No worries. Happy to have you. I'm going to stop recording.
Hopefully you did record.